Star Wars Battlefront is a 2004 game that, in a lot of ways, is a tech demo for a bigger and better Star Wars game, Battlefront 2 from 2005, that was a defining moment in the Star Wars prequel era of video games. This is a game I remember playing a bit back in 2004 on my aunt's roommate's original Xbox one time when she was babysitting me, and I've since played a number of times, and it's a decent start, but following Star Wars Battlefront 2, it became more or less obsolete, and that's the game I played a lot more in my childhood. I do enjoy this, but is it still worth playing in 2026? Well, spoiler, not really. Back in 2002, Pandemic Studios began developing Star Wars Battlefront. The game was developed using the Zero engine, a Pandemic house engine. The game looking to basically be a big online shooter a la Battlefield, only it would use the Star Wars IP in place of real-world battlefields, weapons, and environments. The game pulled sound effects and music from the Star Wars series to add the feel of the film franchise. The game was intended to feature Jedi and Bounty Hunter classes, among other classes, and several levels were planned on top of the stuff we got to expand the game, but due to limitations of the day, these were all cut. Planets planned that never made it include Corellia, Korriban, Raxus Prime, Mon Calamari, and more. The game was released on September 21st, 2004 to coincide with the release of the 2004 Star Wars Special Editions of the original trilogy, which featured additional changes compared to the 1997 Special Editions. The box set for the 2004 edition includes a bonus Xbox demo disc that allows you to play a demo of the game, with the Endor level featured. The game dropped on Windows PC, PS2, Xbox, Mac, and Xbox One later on, with a more recent remaster port by Aspyr, which we're looking at today, that came out on Switch, PS4, Xbox One, and Windows, though you can play it on current-gen versions of the aforementioned consoles through backwards compatibility, so this version I ended up playing on PS5 rather than PS4. The game's story is sort of a prototype for the second game, like most everything else with this game, following you through numerous battles in the Star Wars universe, stretching from the Clone Wars and concluding at the end of the Galactic Civil War across 16 levels, ending on the Battle of Endor at the end of Return of the Jedi. The story is basically non-existent, but you run through levels first as Gungans in the Battle of Theed, then as Theed security forces in Theed City, jumping ahead 8 years to the Separatist Crisis from the comic books, where the Wookiees fight the Separatists and try to stop an invasion by Count Dooku and his forces before failing. Next, we jump ahead to the Battle of Geonosis, where you fight a vast battle between clones and droids at the start of the Clone Wars, taking place after the arena fight during the time Anakin and Obi-Wan had to fight Dooku, leading to a solid victory, but starting the Clone Wars. Following that, we have the Battle of Kamino, the droid army wanting to harm the supply of the Republic's clone army. This was kind of cool and shows the CIS was trying to make some moves on the clones, but of course the Republic wins the day on that one and the clones keep coming. The Battle of Renvar is next, Obi-Wan and the clones fighting off Separatist droids on top of a snowy mountain. The prequel era campaign ending on the first phase of the Battle of Kashyyyk, which ends in a win for the clones and the Jedi, before the failure of Yoda and his forces during Order 66 in Revenge of the Sith, though. It is unclear if this was made as an early tie-in to Revenge of the Sith, or if that was a retcon later that ties these together, but whatever. This game uses Phase 1 clone armor the entire game, rather than the Phase 2 armor of Revenge of the Sith, though this has been speculated to have happened since Lucasfilm was not ready to start revealing information about Revenge of the Sith yet, so they just kind of had to run with what they already had and make shit up slightly based on the comic books, primarily like the Battle of Kamino. Obviously, as Revenge of the Sith had yet to come out, we didn't see the final battles of the Clone Wars from that film, but it gave us a general idea of battles that unfolded during the Clone Wars and between the first and second films. The second half of the game features the Galactic Civil War stuff, which benefited from the full release of the original trilogy, and as a result we see moments from those films with actual source material to base it on, and not just kind of an approximation of what happened after Geonosis based on the slight information made up at that time. The Galactic Civil War follows the stormtroopers in the Dune Sea trying to eliminate the rebel faction during the events of A New Hope, continuing with Vader and his men trying to steal the Death Star plans back from C-3PO and R2 who had escaped their grasp. Sabotage on Renvar takes us back to Renvar, the planet featured in the Clone Wars campaign, the snowy one. That mission ending with the stormtroopers seizing the rebels' listening post. Raid on Yavin 4 takes place before the fall of the Death Star and was the initial raid by stormtroopers who kill several rebels in front of the temple and confirm the location of the rebel base, leading to the Death Star being positioned over the planet. Following the fall of the Death Star, another team comes down to take over the base, and the rebels fight them off for a time, allowing an evacuation to take place. Jump ahead to the Battle of Hoth, and the Empire attempts an invasion of the new rebel base, which, while successful, is held off long enough to evacuate much of the rebel alliance, prolonging the war. Next, we see the fallout of the Battle of Bespin. In Empire Strikes Back, the rebels come in and take over Cloud City, freeing its occupants. The next campaign sees the rebels cleaning up the last of the survivors of the Bespin fight, taking out the troopers in the mines. Finally, the Battle of Endor sees the Rebel Alliance take out the shield generator defending the Death Star, leading to the fall of the second Death Star and the liberation of the galaxy. So basically, the game goes through the beats of the 5 released at the time Star Wars films, adding in some bonus missions that aren't too canon-breaking. A few minor continuity issues appear here, though. In large, it mostly fits within canon. For one, the ARC troopers appear on Geonosis. That was not the case according to other media sources. They just didn't exist at that time. Dark troopers are humans in the game rather than droids, but that was later retconned for the Force Unleashed game that said that these were actually cyborg clones dubbed Phase Zero Dark troopers. A quick catch to seal that error: a few years later, when The Force Awakens came out, in the game Vader shows up on the siege of Mos Eisley, but in the original Star Wars, he was on the Death Star the whole time. Finally, Dark Troopers are on Endor, but the project was discontinued 3 years earlier, though I suppose that could be chalked up to warehouse units that were extra. I don't know. It has a lot of continuity issues, but it may be close enough that I'm just not going to care. Just know the continuity isn't perfect. I will be placing this game right after The Phantom Menace in my Master Star Wars playlist, which you should check out, by the way, if you want hours of Star Wars videos to watch. It'll be linked on my end screen after this video, so take a look. There are 5 types of playable characters in this game: the infantrymen, which are the clone troopers, super battle droids, B1 battle droids in the campaign pre-Geonosis, and rebel soldiers and stormtroopers in the Galactic Civil War portion. This is the best all-around class, and probably just the best in general. I have played hundreds if not thousands of hours of this game and its sequels, and the infantry is just the best all-arounder with the most uses across levels, especially given the command post catching gameplay. We'll talk about that later. Snipers include the clone sharpshooter, assassin droid, rebel marksman, and the scout trooper. These guys are snipers who can be fun on more vast maps, but are largely not excellent for close range, as they are far too slow and inaccurate if you aren't scoping from afar, but this can be kind of a fun way to experience the game if you really want. The engineer includes the clone engineer, droid engineer, rebel smuggler, and imperial engineer. They carry a special launcher, which works good at close range, and they can be good if you're repairing things like ships or ammo and health droids, which, as you can imagine, give you health and ammo depending on the droid. These are usually placed near command posts, which we'll talk about in a second. As I said, be patient. I know you guys are pining to hear about command posts. Heavies include the ARC Trooper, Assault Droid, Rebel Vanguard, and Shock Trooper. These guys mostly carry rocket launchers, which is fun, but not very accurate, practical, or dare I say even good. There are points I found where you can absolutely annihilate numerous guys at choke points where enemies can't rush you, but by and large it's not excellent. The explosions have a pretty wimpy range. Finally, you have special classes. Jetpack troopers have jetpacks. Droidekas are fast rollers that have shields that rip through enemies, but you can become vulnerable since they are slow between turning into ball mode and attack mode, so it's best for beating on walls of stationary troopers if you get a good vantage and throw your shield up. Wookiee smugglers are Wookiees with bowcasters. Dark troopers are Imperial jet troopers, more or less. This game takes place across the Rise of Sith, Clone Wars, and Imperial eras, and as a result, have characters to match these themes. The theming largely works despite some continuity errors, like the Phase 1 troops on Kashyyyk rather than Phase 2 from Revenge of the Sith, as we would actually get in the film. In Instant Action, a mode that sees you basically free play levels, you can choose your era between Imperial and Clone Wars, which allows the maps to have some variety over the campaign. which aims to emulate the films, and thus you kind of just play as the one era depending on what they're trying to simulate. The game has 16 maps, the Bespin platforms, which is an exterior of Cloud City, which is the interior version, Endor Bunker, which adapts Han, Leia, and Chewie's assault on the Imperial shield generator and looks pretty solid. Geonosis Spire, which is the post-Colosseum Battle of Geonosis. This is one of the vaster maps and one of the more fun for class experimentation. Hoth Echo Base, which adapts the assault on the Echo Base from Empire Strikes Back with a large field and Echo Base interiors. Another one where class variation can switch up the gameplay depending what part of the battlefield you're on. Caminos Tipoca City is the Camino city where the clones are made with exterior and interior parts. Kashyyyk Docks is a beach on Kashyyyk. It looks a bit off from the film, but we didn't visually establish the planet very much yet beyond the peaks during the Star Wars Holiday Special, which is of dubious canon, though those peaks largely inspired the first time we see Kashyyyk on film in Revenge of the Sith. Kashyyyk Islands also lacks Kashyyyk's verticality. Naboo Plains looks exactly like the film, which means it looks exactly like the Windows XP default screensaver. Naboo Theed is Theed City, where the palace for Naboo lies and is an urban arena. Renvar Harbor is a vast snow battle where I found a good choke point to farm the rocket launcher kills right at this staircase. Renvar Citadel is a smaller map that is vertical with some caves. This one is a fun close quarters map, though it gets a bit disorienting at the far bases. Tatooine's Dune Sea adapts the area near the Lars homestead and is a little jank, but has a Sarlacc pit, which I personally love. Tatooine Mos Eisley is an urban desert battlefield. Pretty nice. Yavin 4 Arena is what it sounds like. A runes arena with 2 fields holding each main base. This one is probably my favorite of the Battlefront 1 maps. Finally, Yavin Temple is the rebel base on Yavin itself, which is a fun adaptation with interiors and exteriors. The second game laps this game in map design, most of the good designs being pulled over or added in during the Xbox Live DLC, which would be pulled over to the remaster and the Xbox One port of the standard game. I think the cuts like the Kashyyyk maps here are probably deserved, especially since we got a much better Kashyyyk map in Battlefront 2. The game itself largely follows a simple format. Each team starts with 200 troops, either kill all the enemy troops or capture all 5 of the enemy command posts by waiting by them until they go from red to green. Enemies can retake these or take yours, making this kind of a race and a war to kind of hold your bases and take new ones. You can also spawn at these points, which makes it harder for people to take them over. The HUD needed some work in this game for targeting and sighting. The game is typically in third person with a first person option on PC if you wish it to look more like a contemporary first person shooter, games like Battlefield. A small circle shows your targeting and you can click in the stick to aim closer, though it's only necessary when targeting a far out enemy and is by and large fine to just hip shoot. Vehicles are playable. Tanks rip, though vary in usefulness and are a bit clunky when compared to being on foot. It is, however, powerful and has great resistance, though you can't take command posts from them. This game features flying vehicles too, like X-Wings in the Tatooine Dune Sea, for example, but the maps are too small to make this feature overly functional. This would be cut from the second game, bar the Hoth Speeder, which was kept to string up the AT-ATs like in the film. We'll look more into that when we talk about the second game, which replaces this mechanic with full space combat to add more usable functionality for the created dogfighting tools. In this game, the flying is just too tight. The maps aren't big enough, and honestly, it's not a super effective way to pick off enemies. The risk-reward of trying to constantly spin around just simply isn't worth it. This game also features a galactic conquest, which sees you fight across the board trying to dominate planetary systems with a lighter story than the standard campaign, though you can get things like the Death Star laser perk, which can take out planets, or enforcements to take hold of planets, which will change up how the board looks a bit. It adds a layer of structure to what is by and large an expansion of instant action, and there's several options for these little campaigns, but personally I find it sort of redundant when you have a pretty solid campaign, and instant action being able to customize your playthroughs is just superior in every way, basically. Multiplayer works in the same online or in split screen. Pick scenario and maps, fight in 16 vs 16 battles on console or 40 vs 40 on PC. This game died with GameSpy servers originally, though upon the remaster, online functionality returned for the new Aspire touch-up. Since I had Aiden, I didn't actually try to play online. As you can see by the footage, the whole game is playable in split screen, which I think is a big reason this game, and moreover the second game, did so well in the mid-2000s and led to a strict cult following today. The mod community exists, but most of the modders are on the more advanced Battlefront 2 sequel, and I remember playing a bunch of fun mods of this game in college, though by and large I think there was enough content that you never really needed it. For the time, the graphics are good and the game runs on consoles well. As you can see by my footage, I played the remaster, which I played today, with a hair better performance with the consoles. Though honestly, if you have the non-remasters put out on Xbox One, I don't know if the upgrade is really worth it. I had the Xbox One version of both of these games, and of course when this came out I bought into the hype and picked these up. I'm a freak for these games since I piled hundreds of hours on them as a child. And I think the remaster adds a couple cool features, but primarily the upgrades are in Battlefront 2, so we'll come back to those later. I will say the profiles for all the characters are easy to read. It's not hard to see enemies even a ways out, and the remaster just polishes that up even further in terms of draw distance and stuff, while not totally stripping the 6th gen game console look. The music and sounds are pulled from the films, which gives the game the perfect Star Wars aesthetic, though the levels themselves lack music at all, which makes these feel a little less epic than the films they adapted. On top of that, they add some cutscenes pulled from the films of the Star Wars saga, which on the remaster looks pretty solid, but in the original looks pretty crunched, as you would probably expect from a 6th gen video game pulling in film cutscenes. Overall, this game is solid, but largely obsolete by the sequel Battlefront 2, which dropped just over a year later in November of 2005, and makes this feel like an early demo of a better game that came out later. That game, as we will cover, is end-to-end a massive improvement over this game. This game is fun, and without the sequel, this game would be very impressive for its day, but I just can't justify playing this over that. It lacks sprinting, has a worse hub, worse maps, and a few great maps were pulled over and improved. The campaign is clunky and of dubious canon at points. Droid Ecas are really busted, and so are ground vehicles, but the air vehicles were such a pointless addition. The film footage occasionally just seems like random out of context clips and doesn't always work. The campaign lacks special missions and just sees the standard if good gameplay loop. Special objectives weren't added until the sequel to the campaign. You can try using the orders function, which allows you to boss around the computers, but this seems pretty non-functional, at least for me. Computers can play as hero characters like Jedi and Sith, but that feature isn't added in a playable context till this game's sequel, which I think was another major addition to that sequel that made it far more iconic. I think we won by command post attrition in this game a single time as well. Command posts were really hard to hold in this game, and that's something they balanced out better. There are also not sub-modes like Capture the Flag yet. This game is pretty much definitively a prototype of the much better, dare I say, classic Star Wars game that followed it. The bones of a great game are here, and those bones made a structure to the sequel. But this feels kind of mid, especially with the better version in the pipeline so close behind this solid if flawed game. This game reviewed pretty well back in the day, the reviewers on Metacritic giving it around 80 out of 100, though it varied slightly between the ports to Xbox, PlayStation, and PC. Of course, better things were to come, and we'll look at the sequel game very soon.